Madam President, this morning the Republican leader came to the floor and talked about the problems and challenges that we face and the fact that there is another bill which is going to be offered publicly this week by Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the next in a succession of legislation that we've considered over the last several weeks. We've seen dramatic investments in unemployment insurance for the record number of unemployed people in this country. We've seen dramatic investments in the small businesses of America to give them a fighting chance to reopen and to prosper in the future. I've joined in all of these on a bipartisan basis, and I'll continue to. I don't know the specifics of Speaker Pelosi's proposal. Senator McConnell came to the floor and warned us not to think big, not to think about transformational things. And then, of course, he went back to his time-honored chorus about the question of liability. Senator McConnell has come to the floor repeatedly, and said that before he would consider another COVID-19 rescue bill, he would need to see what he calls a red line honored when it comes to liability lawsuits. What's being proposed by Speaker Pelosi when it comes to state and local governments is really an affirmation of what's been said by every one of us when it comes to our first responders, the police, the firefighters, the paramedics, healthcare workers, and teachers. What she says in her bill is they've been hit and hit hard at state and local government levels by this COVID-19. And she is proposing, as I understand it, a substantial commitment to help those units of government that have truly been hurt by this coronavirus. What she's asking for really is whether or not all of our speeches about healthcare workers and police and first responders and firefighters and teachers is really credible, and whether in fact we'll come up with the resources that are needed. Senator McConnell has said that he will not support that legislation unless, as he called it, his red line of liability is honored. What he's saying is that he refuses to fund our police, firefighters, paramedics, and teachers unless we provide guaranteed business immunity from COVID-19 lawsuits by workers and consumers. Senator McConnell's guaranteed business immunity, sadly, is an invitation for irresponsible corporations and businesses to cut corners when it comes to protecting workers and those customers and such who would be threatened by coronavirus. The McConnell red line threat would result in more people being infected by the coronavirus, more people getting sick. That's not what we want. There's a better way. We should be talking about how to do this properly. This afternoon, there'll be a hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee. One of the witnesses being called by the Republicans is a man named Kevin Smart. He's the Chief Executive Officer and President of Quick Check Food Stores in Bonham, Texas. He's testifying on behalf of the National Association of Convenience Stores on this question of liability. I read his statement this morning in preparation for the hearing, and I commend it to my colleagues because I want them to listen carefully to what Mr. Smart says he believes businesses need. Here's what he says. He talks about his own company, Quick Check. Quick Check's first priority is the safety of our employees and customers. Beginning in early March, we adjusted our daily protocols to mitigate the spread of the virus. This was a challenge, listen to what Mr. Smart says, because the guidance provided by the CDC, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, as well as state and local governments often conflicted with one another in addition to being vague and difficult to follow. Yet despite many uncertainties, including the constantly fluctuating public health guidelines, we began to adjust to the pandemic. Mr. Smart is not saying that businesses don't have a responsibility here. He's accepting that responsibility to create a safe environment for workers and customers. But he's saying to us, when are you going to establish the standards? Why do you keep changing the standards? Here we are with Senator McConnell threatening to derail the next rescue bill for police and firefighters and teachers across America unless there is guaranteed immunity from lawsuits. And here's one of the leading companies, the number one primary witness of the Republicans in the Senate Judiciary Committee, saying to the federal government and state governments, establish standards, reasonable standards for us to live up to when it comes to conducting business, and we'll do it. I think that's a reasonable request by his business. Why aren't we doing it? Why hasn't OSHA established standards for the safety of workers? One of our other witnesses here is a gentleman who is the head of the United Food and Commercial Workers, Mark Perrone. I have a special fondness for this union because when I was a college kid, I spent 12 months working in a slaughterhouse in East St. Louis, Illinois. And it was his union that I belonged to back in those days. It was tough, dirty, dangerous work. And I looked to it as an important chapter in my life when I saw how real people go to work every day and many times risk their safety and their health in doing it. Mark Perrone tells us there have been literally thousands of his meat processing workers who have been infected by this virus and 85 who've died as a result of it. What he's looking for, what we're looking for, is for those companies to establish standards of safety for their workers so that they can go back to work in this important business. And some are doing just that. I commend them. Some are working with the union to find safe ways to test their workers and to bring them back to a job site that is safe for them to work in. But they don't have a national standard to live up to. We haven't established a national standard, as we should. Whether through the OSHA or through CDC, we ought to establish standards for businesses across this country to live up to. And I believe many, Mr. Smart with Quick Check, Mark Perrone with the United Food and Commercial Workers, would applaud that. They would say, at least we know what social distancing standards will be used in the workplace. At least we know what protective equipment is required in the workplace to protect our employees. At least we know going into this exactly what the standards are that we need to live up to. Senator McConnell's approach is immunity from lawsuits. Don't establish any standards and don't hold anybody to any standards at all. That's wrong. The net result of that is more people will be in danger, more people will be infected, more people will die. That is not the right approach. What we need to do is to make certain that when this is all said and done, we have a smart approach to this. That a business that is conscientious, cares for its workers, cares for its customers, has standards to live by, that they can meet reasonable standards that have been thought through from a public health viewpoint. It's no wonder that there's uncertainty when you look at the situation today. Center for Disease Control suggests voluntary standards, suggestions. The White House accepts some, publishes some, scoffs at others, ignores others. There's just no clear message to businesses and people across America of what the standards of safety will be. So I would say that this hearing this afternoon is important to hear from Mr. Smart and his willingness to look for standards that he can live by, to hear from Mark Perrone about the dangers to his workers across the workplace. And don't believe for a minute that this caravan of lawsuits threat that we hear over and over again tells the whole story. When you take a look at the lawsuits that have been filed, it's not just the so-called caravan of trial lawyers that are coming in and jumping on this. There are businesses suing businesses. There are lots of lawsuits that have little or nothing to do with personal injury. There are also lawsuits involving workers' compensation. Senator McConnell's suggestion is that we overturn the state laws that give workers the right to recover in the workplace if their injuries or their health is impaired because of the COVID-19 virus. What a terrible outcome that would be, to walk away from decades of established protection for workers in every state in the union for Senator McConnell's so-called red line threat when it comes to the COVID virus number 4 bill that Speaker Pelosi is proposing. And so, Madam President, there's an answer here. There's a reasonable answer. We can say to these businesses across America, join us in the fight. Let's stand together. You protect your workers, you protect your customers, and we'll stand by you. will establish a reasonable standard of conduct for you, which will protect you from frivolous lawsuits. But to take the approach by Senator McConnell of saying we just are going to guarantee immunity against lawsuits is exactly the wrong thing to do. We need a standard of safety that businesses can be proud of, that workers can respect, and that customers can count on, so that they can go into places, do their business, buy the products, and know that there's a standard of good health that's being established for everyone. Madam President, I yield the floor.